And greeting to all of you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Chamber and to SIPE for being our hosts today, and to the TD Bank for being the sponsor of this luncheon. Your generosity is very much appreciated. On this special day, there is someone very special before this particular audience that I want to acknowledge. I don't think he's here, but I'm sure you all know who he is. 70 years ago today, he was in the Royal Canadian Navy plying the English Channel as part of the Allied Armada reinforcing D-Day. He returned home. He served as president of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch No. 1. He became a distinguished business leader in this community, a former president of the Regina Chamber of Commerce, and recently recognized with your award for a lifetime of distinguished service. I think on this anniversary of D-Day, we need to say a special thank you to people like Harold Haig. In the year following his election as leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, Justin Trudeau has made engaging Canadians his top priority. And not in that rather rarefied political bubble in Ottawa, but across the country. In just 1 year, he has participated in well over 500 events in more than 100 different communities from coast to coast to coast. Justin is building a plan focused on what he hears from Canadians and what matters most to them. A strong economy, equal access to employment opportunities for Canadians of all ages, world-class infrastructure, responsible environmental stewardship and resource development, and increased access to post-secondary education for Canadian young people. As the Member of Parliament for Papineau, one of Canada's most multicultural of constituencies, Justin has also been a lifetime advocate for Canada's rich diversity, the kind of thing that Tim was just talking about. He and his Liberal team across the country are committed to open, transparent politics and government, and to giving middle-class families and all Canadians a real and fair chance to do their very best and succeed in the greatest country in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Trudeau.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to start by saying just a few words about the tragedy that has unfolded in Moncton this past week. Here in Regina, we're 3,000 kilometers and 3 time zones away, but I'm sure that you all feel, as I do, that this horrific event happened not to strangers, but to friends. Because every one of those officers, in fact, every RCMP officer, has spent time in Regina, receiving their basic training at the RCMP Academy Depot Division. This truly is where Mounties are made. Just over a year ago, Depot's long-serving commanding officer, Assistant Commissioner Roger Brown, accepted a new post as the RCMP's commanding officer in New Brunswick. I know his experience, gained here in Regina and across Canada, will serve the province well as they seek resolution and healing in the weeks and months to come. The people of New Brunswick are resourceful and resilient, and I know they will overcome the shock and distress in time. For the families who lost children and partners and parents, and even for those whose loved ones were injured, the grief will be more lasting. We need to remember these families, their service and their sacrifice, their heroism and their heartache. And we need to thank them, not just when tragedy strikes, but every day. Because their love for Canada, their commitment to keep us all safe, doesn't stop when their shift ends. I actually got to say thank you in person a few hours ago to the current commanding officer of Depot, Assistant Commissioner Louise Lafrance, and asked her to pass it on to all those under her charge. Fittingly, we were there together this morning at the D-Day commemorations, remembering the 45,000 Canadians who, 70 years ago, paid the ultimate sacrifice for the freedom we enjoy today. 359 died today at Juno Beach, but 5,000 Saskatchewanians perished throughout World War II, and we need to remember. So today is indeed a day to remember all who serve and remind ourselves that every day we must strive to be worthy of the sacrifices they made for all of us. On a less solemn note, I'd like to thank you all so much for welcoming me back to Regina. When I was last here, I attended the Rough Riders home opener against Calgary. Well, the green team, and we know how that season turned out. So it was a good beginning for both of us, I thought. And so much has happened in the past year. My own family has grown. Sophie and I learned quickly that man-to-man goes out the window with 3 kids, and you have to switch to zone defense. On the work front, my party gained 2 new MPs in by-elections and lost all its senators. And I starred in not 1, but 2 rounds of Conservative attack ads. About those ads, I'm often asked why the Liberals don't take the same approach. After all, Mr. Harper's government has certainly given us a few things to work with. My answer there is always the same. I prefer the sunny ways, championed by our first French-Canadian Prime Minister, Wilfrid Laurier. When he talked about sunny ways, Laurier was referring to the Aesop's fable, The North Wind and the Sun. In that story, the wind and the sun argue about who is stronger, and the 2 fight to see who can take off a traveler's coat. So the wind blusters and blows, but the traveler just holds onto his coat tighter and tighter. When it's the sun's turn, all he does is shine down warmly, and the traveler slips off his coat. For me, that story perfectly captures the essence of some of our core Canadian values. The idea that persuasion is superior to force, and that kindness trumps aggression. J'adore cette fable, et je pense qu'elle trouve également écho chez beaucoup de personnes au Saskatchewan. Pas seulement parce que votre sens de la justice sociale est inébranlable, mais aussi parce que vous avez maintenant l'une des économies les plus florissantes au pays. It resonates well here in Saskatchewan, not just because of your sense of social justice that remains steadfast, but also because you're now home to one of the sunniest economies in the nation. Your renaissance started about 10 years ago, when Saskatchewan first broke free of the historic have-not position among provinces. Perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, you made that leap when my friend Ralph Goodale was Canada's finance minister. In the decades since, thanks to strong commodity prices and your own hard work and ingenuity, your progress has been remarkable. And as much as I want to congratulate you for your economic growth, as the leader of a national party, I want to thank you as well. Your economy is performing at twice the national average. Without the significant real growth here in Saskatchewan and in Alberta and in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada's national growth would be almost non-existent. All Canadians owe you a debt of gratitude for the hard work you've done, because of the economic success you've achieved benefits us all. And some Canadians, I think, owe you an apology. I'm talking about those who would suggest that strong resource economies here in the West are akin to some sort of disease. If annual GDP growth that's nearing 5% is a disease, I'd hate to see the cure. When your local economy is performing so well, it might be hard to believe that you are the exception and not the rule. Let me assure you, your success is exceptional. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about how Canada's national economy is now performing as a whole. See, in the past 30 years, Canada's economy has more than doubled in size, grown over 100%. But middle-class family incomes have risen by only 15%. So for far too many Canadian families, the only financial measure that has kept pace with GDP growth is household debt. In fact, we're now carrying more household debt than families in the United States and the United Kingdom, and consequently, we're saving much less. CIBC estimates that the average 35-year-old now puts aside less than half of what their parents did at the same age. So if we have any hope of reversing those troubling trends, we must create the conditions for sustained economic growth right across the country. If you want to appear to balance a budget in the short term, sure, monotone austerity might get you there. But for deep and durable financial success, Canada needs a growth agenda, not an austerity agenda. Growth is what we need to give the middle class some confidence that their family's economic future will be bright. And make no mistake, that confidence is essential. Right now, far too many Canadians are worried about making ends meet. They don't know if they can afford to send their kids to university, to college, or to technical school. They don't know if their kids will be able to find jobs once they graduate. They're worried about saving for their retirement. They're worried about everything that comes after. And when we get worried, we fixate on our own challenges. And it becomes harder and harder to solve every other problem we face as a nation. Nous devenons anxieux et réfractaires. Nous nous sentons lésés, nous cherchons des coupables. D'un bout à l'autre du pays, plus les inquiétudes sont grandes, et plus les divisions sont profondes, et des réelles conséquences pour nous tous. From one end of the country to the other, the deeper the anxieties, the deeper the divisions. This has real consequences for all of us. That's because growth we've seen over the past 3 decades has been the product of a broadly supported economic agenda. Things like fiscal discipline, openness to trade, the proper development of our natural resources. The middle class got behind those ideas over the past 30 years because they were promised that everyone would share in the prosperity that would follow. Well, the prosperity came, but the sharing, not so much. As a result, we risk losing middle-class support for a growth agenda. People will become interested in securing their own future and less interested in improving the quality of life for all Canadians. And if that happens, we'll all be poorer, and not just in dollar terms. So, I know that's a pretty bleak, perhaps windy picture, but there is some sunshine if you know where to look. Our federal fiscal position is actually extremely strong. Because of some tough choices that Canadians made in the 90s, our government is in a far better position than it once was. Back then, our federal debt represented 70% of GDP, or today, the debt is less than half that. The US and the UK, they can only dream of being where Canada was back in 1995. So, you see what can happen when economic growth and fiscal responsibility go hand in hand. Ça met le Canada dans une position unique. La classe moyenne est sans ressources, tout comme nos provinces et nos territoires, en raison du vieillissement de la population et de la hausse des coûts liés aux soins de santé. The middle class is tapped out, as are our provinces and territories, due to rising aging populations and rising healthcare costs. But the federal government does have room to invest. Now, I don't believe that governments can solve all our problems, and I don't believe that they should even try. But the things we do as a government, we must do well. And in particular, I believe it is the Prime Minister's job to get the big things right. Because these are the things fundamental to the lives of Canadians, the people that we were elected to serve. That's why the Liberal government, led by me, would put a renewed focus on 5 big things: on our people, on trade, on the smart management of our natural resources, on innovation, and on infrastructure. When it comes to people, few things can deliver economic success, security, and confidence like education. 7 out of 10 of Canada's future new jobs will require post-secondary education. So if we can raise our post-secondary education attainment rate to 70%, we'll have a workforce ready to meet Canada's future job market needs. Regina is well positioned to lead on that front, thanks to its strong academic community with the University of Regina, the First Nations University of Canada, other Aboriginal institutions, the Saskatchewan Institute of Applied Science and Technology, and of course, lots of apprenticeships in the private sector. Long-term investments in post-secondary education will prepare us for the future, but we're also facing some urgent labor challenges right now. It affects different parts of the country in different ways, but here in Saskatchewan, it's reflected in an unemployment rate that's half the national average. You need workers, and you need them now, or in some cases, yesterday. While opportunities should always be offered to Canadians first, it's clear that immigration has a role to play, as it has throughout our history. For more than 30 years, the temporary foreign worker program functioned pretty well. But under the Conservatives' watch, there has been story after story of abuse, poor administration, little oversight, and no enforcement. The program as it stands has let down both Canadians and those who hope to someday become Canadians. Liberals believe that the program needs to return to its original purpose: to fill jobs on a limited basis where no Canadian workers can be found. We need greater transparency and accountability in the program, driven by accurate community-by-community data. And we must have genuine enforcement of its rules in partnership with the provinces. But most importantly, we need to recommit ourselves as a nation to welcoming more permanent immigrants and providing them with legitimate and lasting paths to citizenship. Minister Boyd and Brad Wall's government have been requesting that from the federal government for several years now. They asked that Saskatchewan's allotment under the Provincial Immigrant Nominee Program be raised by 2,000 people per year. What did they get? Just a few hundred. 450 more last year and 275 more this year. Think of how much pressure could be taken off the temporary foreign worker program if this reasonable request for more permanent residents had been granted. If the federal government was sincere in its desire to help Saskatchewan's employers, Mr. Harper and Mr. Kenney would have guaranteed the request, not blocked it. I'm similarly skeptical about Mr. Harper's ability to build trust and respect with First Nations and other Aboriginal peoples. His mismanagement of these critical relationships began with his senseless cancellation of the Kelowna Accord and continues to this day with the collapse of the latest First Nations educational deal and his failure to appreciate that while governments issue permits for resource development, only communities can grant permission. So clearly, it won't shock you to know that I'm of the opinion that when it comes to our greatest strength, our people, Mr. Harper is getting a few things wrong. Let's get back to the other 4 things the federal government needs to get right. Foreign direct investment and trade. To quote Prime Minister Laurier again, the Liberal approach to trade involves seeking markets wherever markets are to be found. And that's a fair description of my party's position today. We are passionate supporters of free trade. That's why we chose not to play politics with the recently announced free trade agreements with the Republic of Korea and the agreement in principle with the European Union. We are broadly supportive of both of those agreements. Properly negotiated and implemented, they should be good for Saskatchewan, a heavily trade-dependent province. The bottom line is that competitive, exporting sectors pay 50% higher wages than industries that are not trade-intensive. That's good news for the middle class and the communities they call home. And for people living, as you do, smack dab in the middle of the country, you know it is a fundamental responsibility of governments to make sure growers, producers, and extractors can access those markets. We've seen this government fail our farmers on this with the grain by rail debacle of the past year. But we're also watching them fail on another file, critically important to Saskatchewan, our natural resources, which is the third opportunity I want to talk about this morning. Contrairement au gouvernement fédéral actuel, nous ne considérons pas que la croissance économique et la gérance de l'environnement soient incompatibles. Pour tout dire, faire semblant au XXIe siècle qu'il faut choisir entre l'une et l'autre est aussi mauvais que faux. Pretending in the 21st century that we have to choose between economic growth and environmental stewardship is not just wrong, it's actually harmful. Last October, I surprised a lot of people by going to Washington, D.C. and telling a room full of Democrats that this Canadian Liberal supports the Keystone XL pipeline. And I do. Having examined the facts and accepting the judgment of the National Energy Board, I know that it is in the national interest. Keystone would create jobs and growth and strengthen our ties with the world's most important market and generate wealth. Most of all, it's in line with what I believe is a fundamental role of the Government of Canada, to open up markets abroad for Canadian resources and to help create responsible and sustainable ways to get those resources to those markets. But at the same time, I understand our U.S. partners' reluctance. A lot of it stems from the fact that Keystone has been treated like a foregone conclusion, rather than a complex international project that calls for careful, nuanced negotiation and environmental credibility. It doesn't help that Mr. Harper's government has stubbornly refused to enact stronger, clear environmental policies, including some means to price carbon pollution. This week, the White House revealed a new proposal targeting greenhouse gases as part of a broader plan to tackle global climate change. The message we send to Americans about our own environmental priorities, in French it's "c'est pas grave." In English, don't worry about it. In either language, it's an embarrassment. A week after I returned from Washington, I told the Calgary Petroleum Club that if Canada had stronger, more credible environmental policies in place, the Americans would have approved Keystone XL a long time ago. I stand by that statement. It's increasingly clear to everyone but Mr. Harper, it seems, that consensus building is the only responsible way to turn resource opportunities into economic realities. We need to draw on our intelligence, on our scientific expertise, on our ability and our willingness to solve problems as much as we draw on the resources themselves. Here again is something your province does exceptionally well. Your commitment to innovation has always seen you through. From sod houses in the south, to the Canadian light source synchrotron in Saskatoon, to the groundbreaking work being done by the Petroleum Technology Research Centre right here in Regina. That's the kind of resourcefulness Canada needs as we settle into this new and uncertain century. Je suis très fier que Wilfrid Laurier soit aux côtés du bras canadien Canadarm 2 et du manipulateur agile spécialisé Dexter sur notre nouveau billet de 5 $. Mais cela me rend tout aussi impatient de découvrir la technologie qui sera mise de l'avant dans 10 ans et dans 20 ans. As proud as I am of the fact that Wilfrid Laurier shares space with Canadarm2 and Dexter on our new $5 bill, I'm also eager to find out what technology might be featured there 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Those new ideas and the high-paying, skilled jobs that come with them will be critical to our future growth. I have tremendous faith in Saskatchewan's ability to remain an innovative leader in science and technology and, well, just about any other endeavor you set your minds to. This is a province of winners. You have the Grey Cup to prove it. And though he didn't come back home with the other big cup, how proud you must all be, as I am, Justin Tokarski. From softball in his parents' basement to the Stanley Cup playoffs, I've been a Habs fan my entire life, and his games in net against the Rangers were some of the most exciting hockey I've ever seen. Big round of applause. No one who spent any time in this province can be surprised at the kind of tenacity he displayed and the hope he brought to an entire country as he stepped up in a way beyond his youth and his experience. But back to the reason you invited me here today. I've mentioned higher education and skills, freer trade, natural resources, and the environment and innovation. The last of the 5 big things the government needs to get right is infrastructure investment. As I said to a gathering of municipal leaders last week, and as I said to your own mayor just yesterday in our meeting, federal funding needs to be sufficient, predictable, and sustainable. If we want a strong country filled with neighborhoods, towns, and cities we can all be proud of, the Government of Canada must build better partnerships with municipalities. That starts with addressing the problems in the new Building Canada Fund. The Conservatives boast that this new 10-year fund has never been bigger, and yet they've slashed the available funding by nearly 90% in its first year. Last year, the fund made $1.7 billion available for infrastructure projects. This year, the government is only investing $210 million. And not only has that fund been slashed, it's been delayed. We're now well over 2 months into this year's construction season. The new fund limits what the money can be used for and how, and municipalities are being forced to compete against universities, colleges, and other government entities for the same, smaller pool of funds. More of the fund's money will be available down the road, but according to the government's own plan, you'll have to wait another 5 or 6 years before you see it. More than 70% of it is locked away until 2019. I believe it's irresponsible, at a time when our towns and cities are starved for capital, to cut, delay, and distort our country's core infrastructure program so badly. It may move the government closer to a balanced budget in an election year, but it does nothing to generate economic growth, stimulate job creation, or improve the quality of life for Canadians. Même s'il était allé sur 10 ans, le plan du gouvernement n'est pas assez ambitieux. Si nous voulons obtenir des résultats tangibles, nous devons faire davantage. Davantage pour aider nos villes à bâtir des systèmes d'aqueduc et des réseaux de transport en commun fiables et sécuritaires. Davantage pour aider nos voisins qui ont du mal à trouver un logement abordable. Even if we want transformative results, we must do more. More to help our cities build safe and reliable water and transit systems. More help to folks who are struggling to find an affordable place to live. And more to help our businesses and our farmers get their products to customers when expected. Ralph Goodale has shown tremendous leadership in response to this winter's grain shipment crisis, but it's a crisis that should have been avoided. We're talking about positive, constructive ways to move this country forward by focusing on people, on trade, on the smart management of our natural resources, on innovation, and on infrastructure investments. These are some of the core policy areas you can expect to see in our election platform. By getting these things right, we can strengthen the middle class and, as a result, our entire economy. That, I believe, is what politics should be about. Rallying Canadians around a greater vision, reminding them of what we can accomplish when we work together, and inspiring them to build an even better future. Listen, I'm aware of what the attack ads say, and I know there are cynics out there who argue that anyone who favors dialogue, who talks about things like understanding, unity, and compassion, is naive. But I will always believe that when it comes to getting the big things right, persuasion and goodwill are the paths Canadians will always choose. And I will always believe, because Canadians have shown this to me at every opportunity, that with a little hope and a lot of hard work, there is no problem we cannot solve together. Merci beaucoup.
Got a lot of questions. I don't think we're going to get to them all, but we'll try to get to a few. First question is, what are your thoughts and ideas regarding the treatment and support for Canada's veterans?
Well, particularly on a day like this, we must recognize all that we take for granted, all that our servicemen and women have offered to their country, asking very little in return. But expecting a level of respect and understanding that recognizes all they were willing to sacrifice, and in many cases did sacrifice, for this country. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to support them, to offer them what they need, either as they age or to help them through the very real challenges of PTSD with rigorous and supportive mental health approaches. We need to do a better job of supporting our veterans, both after they return, but also as we send our Canadian forces around the world to promote the values, the ideals, and protect the principles that has made this country strong. We have to make sure we're giving them both the respect, the equipment, and the kind of political plan so that they can actually achieve and win with their sacrifices. That's what we have to do a much better job of, all of us in Ottawa, and I'm looking forward to being part of that. Yes.
Please comment on the relative importance of achieving a national securities regulator, both from a Liberal Party of Canada priority standpoint, as well as from a national economic perspective.
One of the most important things is that Canada understands how important it is that we are able to draw in investment from around the world. We have to have a clear plan and demonstrate to foreign sources of capital that if they want to come to Canada and are willing to play by our rules, whether it's around labor regulations or environmental expectations or health and safety codes and governance structures, then they're more than welcome. And indeed, Canada should be one of those places that the world could look to because of our natural resources, because of our human resources, because of our economic stability, because of our political stability. We're a place that needs people to draw in. And having a much better system in terms of securities regulations will go a long way towards decreasing barriers to foreign investment, but also ease the companies that, like so many do, try to work right across this country and not purely local. So that's certainly something we need to continue to work on. Thank you.
Can you describe your, sorry, it's hard to see the light here, your vision for Canadians with disabilities, especially FASD? Thank you.
For me, Canada's about having a real and fair chance to succeed. We're this country that people come to this country, whether it's a few weeks ago or 10 generations ago or millennia upon millennia ago in the case of First Nations peoples. And you come to a place that's too big, too empty, too cold, too many months of the year. And we learn that you have to lean on each other. And you learn that you have to work hard to make it through this winter. And the story of this country has been of every generation working hard to create opportunities for the next. And that has been the essence of what has allowed Canada to flourish as a country. That everyone has a real and fair chance to succeed. And these days, more and more people are worried that our kids are not going to have the same kinds of opportunities or quality of life that we had. And for Canadians living with disabilities, that's an even greater challenge. We need to understand that one of the core principles of this country is equality of opportunity, is that real and fair chance. And we have to be both rigorous and generous in how we build structures and support so that everyone, regardless of their challenges, has an opportunity to build that success, to contribute to this society, and to leave a better future for those who come after.
I think we'll make this the last question. There's just so many. And what is the Liberal Party position on new citizenship rules that will make me and my kids second-class citizens just because we have dual citizenship?
That's a really interesting bill, and it's an example for me of what this government is actually quite good at. They'll say something that we can all agree with, like someone who commits an act of treason against Canada or an act of war against Canada shouldn't be a Canadian. I mean, we can all say, yes, there should be terrible consequences for someone who commits an act of war against Canada or treason against Canada and is Canadian. But the problem with that statement is, first of all, the fact that if someone commits an act of treason or an act of war against Canada, we have a justice system and a system of laws and punishment that will be rigorous and have very real consequences that in serious cases will lead to life in prison. But as soon as you say something like that, like the previous statement, that they should no longer be Canadians, you're making a difference between someone who was born in this country and someone who chose to come to this country to become Canadian. Because obviously if a Canadian-born citizen were to commit an act of treason, you can't actually pull away their citizenship and send them home because they're from here. But if someone who came here, perhaps as a child or a teenager, lives here for 30 years, becomes a Canadian citizen, contributes, for them to know that just because they were born somewhere, there could be greater consequences for them were they to engage in the unthinkable, actually devalues the citizenship of every single person who chose Canada as opposed to being lucky enough to be born here. And that flies in the face of what has made Canada so incredibly successful. Any person around the world comes to this country can become a Canadian citizen, not because of speaking a language or being of a particular religion or culture or background or history, but because they affirm that they're willing to accept and live by our shared values. Values of openness, respect, compassion, a desire to work hard, a willingness to be there for each other, a desire for equality, for justice, for opportunity. These are all things that every country aspires to. Most countries, in the developed world anyway. But we're the one country that defines ourselves by these, because there's no typical Canadian. And to devalue the idea of acquiring citizenship is to fly in the face of exactly the example we need to be giving to the world. Because the world is challenged with increasing migrations, and climate refugees, and conflict refugees, and people who are crossing borders to try and find and build a better life for themselves. And countries where there is a typical national identity, as most countries are, around an ethnicity or a language or a religion or a history or a culture or what have you, are now having to redefine what their national identity is, because there are so many others who now share their country. And Canada provides that solution for the world that we need, of defining ourselves by more than just our surface identities, and indeed, instead by the values we choose to live by and fight for. And anything that weakens that frame, regardless of how politically saleable it may be, we can all agree terrorists are bad, traitors are bad, but to play on that and weaken what has made Canada so great, our citizenship, is, I think, misunderstanding the extraordinary nature of this country and how important we are to the entire world. Merci beaucoup.